I did bring a comment up and then that was not for your Mr. On.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Can we make the slides better?
Okay, we're good to start.
I hereby call to order the Independent Ethics Review Board on Thursday, December 15th at 3:30 p.m. Item 2, public comments. Do we have any public comments?
No, ma'am, we do not.
Item 3, is the consideration of an action on the September 21st, 2022 meeting minutes. Do I have a motion, or were there any changes, updates, questions regarding the minutes from our last meeting?
I
If there are
move
no-
to accept the minutes.
Motion to approve. Second, all in favor? Motion carries. Item 4, recent articles of interest. So we had quite the homework assigned to us by our city attorney. And I am going to throw a wrench in the order and start with Fort Worth,
Oh, good. Okay. Which one was that one?
my favorite. Always our friend to the north.
Part 1 or part 2?
Well, part 1, and then we'll segue into part 2 since they go together. I wanted to read the very first item at the top of the article because it is very relevant in light of our recent city council meeting. Thank you to all the board members that attended. That was a great success. A nice discussion. It says there's a reason that many ethics policies treat the appearance of a conflict of interest with nearly as much seriousness as a clear-cut conflict. So I wanted to bring up this article for discussion and look for comments around it. Basically, the gist was regarding a city manager who was bumming a ride with his friend's private jet to Aspen on Labor Day weekend. And the friend, and I'm using the quotations, is a very influential, prominent family developer, etc. in the area. Comments, observations, thoughts around this?
So as I read this article, it dawned on me that has nothing, this is not within our purview or scope because it's a city manager and that's an employee, not a elected appointed official.
Right.
So we shouldn't. This, however, if its title were different, and they were elected or appointed, exactly.
So when it comes to ethics, who does the city manager answer to?
City council.
So,
That's his boss, and he reports to them.
so city council will have to bring this up as an ethic violation.
I'm sorry, I don't know how it's done in Fort Worth. If it were to happen here in Sugar Land, the city manager is subject to the City Manager Association's RTMA's Code of Ethics, as well as the City Employees Code of Ethics. And because he reports directly to City Council, they would have a closed executive session, and I'm sure they would exchange some points.
Okay, thanks.
But if this were a council member versus a city manager, then this is something that somebody could sign and swear to a formal complaint, and then that would rise to our level of purview. Well, it would first go to Meredith to see if it was, if it met the criteria for the code. I'm not saying it correctly, am I?
No, you're perfect. I'm
Okay.
so proud.
So it first goes to Meredith and she says, yes, this is governed by this code of ethics, and it's up to us to decide then, do we have an investigation and hearing? What action do we take? And so then once that kicks it over to our board, then we would convene and actually discuss and potentially conduct an actual investigation.
So if it was, if they tried to fill out their disclosure on it and submit it, what would be your response to them on that?
Now, if an elected official were to file a conflict disclosure under 171, then there is no conflict. Because they have complied with state law, and as long as they step out of the room when this item is on the agenda and do not participate,
And that's,
then there's no ethical violation.
that's kind of what he said later in the article, but they didn't really have a define, I guess, no, that was the other 65.
This one, he never actually
Yeah,
disclosed it
yeah.
as a potential
Yeah.
conflict of interest. And so because it wasn't disclosed, and that's, why you
Right.
constantly tell people disclose, disclose, disclose. As long as you disclose and then remove yourself appropriately, then it's not, an issue. It's when you aren't transparent.
Interestingly enough, the city manager, myself, and the purchasing department are also required under law to make disclosures, because we are involved in the purchasing process. So we are taken out of the process if we might have a conflict, and those documents are filed.
So there's no dollar limitation on this disclosure.
It's up, if it's for a purchasing reason, no. It's any relation.
So this guy could take a $25,000 plane trip and.
If he was an elected or appointed official, it's $100.
Usually Ted's.
But being a city manager, no, there's not a
Mhm.
dollar, but an elected official, it's under state law, it's $100.
So, so you're up to speed, at the recent council meeting, over the last year, this board has been working to develop investigation procedures. We now have formalized, approved investigation procedures. So should a formal complaint be sworn and signed, kicked over to us, we now have a governing document of procedures of what steps we take next. And what are opportunities for, action versus, what outcomes could come of the investigation. So all that's now been formalized, memorialized. So we are well positioned should that happen, which we don't hope that any of that happens. And we have a great city council with high morals and ethics. Comment on this article that I wanted to draw attention to that I thought was interesting. It says, the incident also points to weakness in the city's process for handling ethics complaints.
Yeah,
Thanks to a 2019 council decision, Fort Worth does not have a standing ethics commission. So I think just the presence of our board is beneficial. And the fact that we have, a formal code of ethics and we have investigation hearing procedure. So I thought this was really timely of an article because the subject matter was something that was discussed at council, things that we're doing actively. And it also, it was a great point that Andrew made that this technically wouldn't be in our purview because it is a city manager, but if it wasn't, this is definitely something that could land on our desk.
I also like down at the bottom of the first page about the city's ethics policy. And then the discussion that we had during the council meeting last week about being reasonably regarded, what a reasonable person would do. It was interesting that they're using that same language in their policy.
I'm sorry. Ms. Roberts, you're gonna need to turn your camera on under state law to be counted as part of our forum.
Sure, I'm in the process of changing over computers. The one I'm on now, the camera is broken, so just give me a moment.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Would you like to light stand?
Right?
Thank you.
Where is it?
One of those, just keep pushing buttons till. rather than-
First try, yes, ma'am.
Because I think if we get really dark, better.
So that's a question I have, and I had with the council just recently approved, define reasonable. Define reasonable. What do you mean by reasonable? What's, how do you do an ethics evaluation of reasonable?
So, can we?
Go for it.
Okay, so when it was proposed that we use the term avoid reasonable appearance of a project. That is the scope of the document. And it's when you're reading it and you're trying, why did we write this? And you stay on the good side of this. When we were writing them, everybody used the word as a pass smell test. And that's just way too broad. So if you do something that appears to be unethical, there's no punishment you're gonna get from us. You will get roasted on social media, but we're not gonna do anything wrong, and that suggestion of avoidance appearance of impropriety is a suggestion how they behave in public or on private. So that they don't get caught up in a situation where people are questioning what they do. But that, they're allowed to do that. It's merely, we don't think you should do, you should be aware, and they all are aware of social media.
Which is why.
It
the
is, but
introduction
we're
was
not
like that.
governing that behavior. We're saying, we'd like you to pay attention to what you're doing in public and in private. Because you're the ones who are going to face public scrutiny. Unless you break the rules, we're not going to tell you what you can and can't do. It was within the scope of the document, everything we talk about here, we want to stay clear of any allegations, behaviors. And that is vague, but there's also no punishment. It's not breaking a rule, and there's no punishment for it. So if Sally and I went to school together from third grade on, and I'm on ethics, and she's on planning and zoning, she gets formally brought up allegation that she violated the policy. And she calls me up, she's like, my best friend, can you meet me at Baker Street? I want to know what I'm about to go through. And I go, sure, we're friends. I'll meet you at Baker Street and I'll tell you what the whole process is. So now you understand what's coming your way. She didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. But if somebody takes a picture of that lunch and puts it on social media, that Sally, who's on planning and zoning, is currently under investigation by the ethics committee, is sitting there having lunch with someone on the ethics committee, that doesn't look good. Neither of us did anything wrong, but you're certainly going to get held to task publicly.
I think it's a tone setting statement. So,
Right,
I mean,
so-
it's in the introduction, like the introductory language, and it's an aspirational tone setting statement. It's not, there's not a subsection 3.1, you violated the reasonable, whatever. It's not within the actual code itself. It's in the introduction and more of like a tone setting. And I think a lot of these articles actually speak to perception being equitably as important as, actual conflicts of interest, for example. That's, a common statement to me because, and I wrote when I was reading this, perception influences confidence and trust. So I think when you're conducting yourself as an elected official, being mindful of perception and being mindful of like that reasonable standard is, of great importance
Still
for the
pretty broad.
office.
Don't.
It is, but there's no, like, we're saying you can be as dumb as you want in public. We're not gonna stop you from that. It's not gonna be fun.
So what will happen is if someone were to file a complaint on this, I would review it and say, okay, this is the mayor. Yes, the mayor is subject to the code. Okay, you're saying he has a conflict of interest. Yes, conflict of interest is subject to the code. I would then refer it to this board. This board would then look at it and you would all decide, is it under the section division 2 with their actual violations that can be punished? And based on your conversation today, I think you're going to say, no, it's actually under division 1, doesn't meet the spell test. We're not going to punish you, can't punish you, but we think that there is a reasonable appearance of impropriety. And so you'll just say, no punishment, but we think that you can do better next time.
You say you keep
Yes.
people like. If they grew up in Sugar Land or they grew up in South Bronx, people like it's probably very different. And we're not punish them for not being polite. But they may suffer some consequence beyond that.
Just
It's
think before
intentionally
you do
vague.
something and don't get yourself, tried in the media, which happens so often nowadays.
Right.
Well, I've even seen contract language where it uses that word reasonable, and then in court, it's, what would the general public think? Not this particular individual who's got to be under their bonnet sort of thing, but just in general, the general public, how would they view this as kind of is that what you've seen?
Yes, under legal standard, reasonable would be what would an average person do in this
Yes.
situation?
Yeah.
With normal circumstances. So force majeure, it's going to be a different, but it's
Right.
basically, we don't expect you to climb a ladder, jump over a bridge and do all this to approve something. We want you to do something reasonable. walk across the hall and ask for it to be signed.
So it's a stretch.
And so there's part two, any other comments, Raquel or anybody else about first part of the article? So spoiler alert, he does get reprimanded. So the city manager was reprimanded after the trip. The statement said officials must use heightened discretion, and that's kind of what we're talking about here too, is any other thoughts around this? So they did find it to be inappropriate. They did actually reprimand the individual. I do believe it said he will have to remove himself from those matters that are related. And it said the perceptions of a conflict of interest were flawed. So I mean, like, that was his defense, but it didn't substantiate or it didn't refute the claim just because he thinks that the perceptions of the conflict were flawed. That was both the individual's defense, and it did not hold.
And clearly.
So sorry to skip right to that, but it was just super relevant to, our recent meeting and things that we have ongoing discussions about. And this is gonna be fun, so now I'm just grabbing up. So head south to Kima.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe not. I don't even want to go through it again.
Shoot.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Well, and honestly, it's often our friends to the north, so I thought it's fully fair that we head southeast. Does anyone want to take this article?
We've been looking at this one. I mean, there was 7 allegedly. I mean, it's nothing but allegations, allegedly that this, allegedly that there's no hardcore evidence or facts or investigations.
So when we go through the articles and have these sections, we will almost never have like the actual facts and evidence and things to review because it's news articles, right? So I think the purpose of these discussions is to kind of see, one, what's going on in various communities across Texas and beyond often, and so that we can be aware of what is the ethical environment, what are other cities seeing as far as violations. That's number one. Number two, it's to exercise that ethical side of our brain. So are we applying our code of ethics to these situations? What questions? So what you mentioned is actually one of the purposes of the conversation, to say, okay, what would we want to see? What information would we need to have a better discussion, or what would we want to ask for? Because as part of our investigation hearings, we would actually have the ability to request documents, to request evidence and support. So that is actually something super relevant to how we would conduct an investigation, because none of this will ever give us the actual details and facts, but it's enough to actually facilitate a discussion.
And the delete discussion is actually very helpful for me because I am obligated to give a legal opinion based on what I think the board will do. So as I hear you go through these, I get an idea of how the board analyzes things so that I can provide that.
He just sounds like a bully.
Yeah.
But this also says there's a criminal complaint.
Mhm.
At that point, we wouldn't deal with anything until that's settled.
Right.
Because he was convicted of class C or above.
Classy is the lowest you can, so you can be any of it.
Right, but I'm saying, like, if someone's convicted of class, if a misdemeanor, like a higher level misdemeanor, they can be removed from
Office,
office. Well, not the elected.
yes. You don't, if you're convicted and, for certain convictions, you're also going to be removed from office, certain similar convictions. So there would not be a recall election. We don't have an option.
Right.
You've got to find a new.
So.
Which is one of our recommendations in the last, year and a half, 2 years, crimes of moral turpitude.
Yes, ma'am.
We amended the city charter, right? And we got to vote on it as citizens and it was approved. And so we have that language now in our charter that if you're convicted of a crime of moral turpitude, that you are automatically forfeiting your seat.
I'm so impressed with the.
Thank you.
Towards the end of this, They talked about how those asking for multi-agency investigation rather than hiring a law firm or.
Yes.
So our current plan is. If Meredith has to, if you have to recuse yourself or something, there's an attorney.
I will recuse myself.
Right.
It's not a,
Right,
if,
okay.
I will.
Outside
There's an
for-
attorney. Do we need to come up with a contingency plan beyond that? Cindy Lou is the attorney that you referred us to. Had already had financial dealings, friendship, something like that with council member, mayor, or.
So the individual that I would hire to fill in, participates as a contract city attorney for other cities. So they would not have business dealing, and as a judge, for other cities and in municipal courts. They would not have dealings with our council members because they're not working in those types of environment.
Okay.
They're not within our jurisdiction, he does not practice in Fort Bend. I selected him specifically
Okay.
because it would be
Never be
very
conflicted out.
difficult for him to be. But, his experience is phenomenal.
Yeah, who's going to,
I
if
trust.
they're
that
not
he will-
available, they've done personal business with,
Then I would look for a number two.
Okay.
Hopefully that's not me, like,
I.
John would
get
believe in this
the
person.
complaints. Okay,
better.
and, so we can do that.
I thought it was interesting that they did decline. They said, we don't need an attorney to do an investigation.
Right.
They've confirmed their statements. Move it over to
Mhm.
the appropriate law enforcement. Any other thoughts around Kima?
I have one thought, or more of a question. So, it seems like there were folks who felt comfortable coming forward with, what was going on in the background. Does the city have a whistleblower policy to help protect, staff? And I don't know if it's, something that it would be like in their code of ethic, in the code of ethics versus would there be a place for it here in our code?
For employees protection and the introduction of our employee handbook, we have all the federal language that talks about we don't discriminate, you have an obligation to report. And we actually have the whistleblower as a separate paragraph, so we do protect, we recently had one actually. For the animal situation, one employee remained because that employee was the one that brought all the allegations for that employee no longer works in the animal department. But because this person brought allegations of criminal or potential criminal, they now had whistleblower protection, they kept their job. So we
And they
do
have to. I mean, it's federally regulated, so it's one of the things that they have to have in their employee handbook. There's very specific language that has to be incorporated within it. So that, that's if that doesn't fall under.
But thank you for double checking. I do appreciate that.
Okay.
Anything else on Kima or any other discussion items? No. Any preference in our next article before I just grab a section because I'm out of order? Central Texas, Granite. Central Texas, right? Granite Shoals, your marble falls, right? So actually, this is a follow-up article, isn't it, Meredith? Didn't we have this a while back? Sorry if I'm way out of order. Fort Worth got me excited and then I just went from there.
Well, Granite Shoals, yes, this is a repeat offender. There was another city that also has significant repeat offender article 3, but that person was not reelected. So you will not be seeing.
They fixed the glitch.
But yes, you have seen articles related to this.
So I recall, Counselor Fort, I think that's how you get that, when I saw that, I was like, oh, you again. So you'll find, and it's really interesting that we keep seeing some of these things continue to A, be in the news, but B, some of the issues seem to continue to be ongoing until our friends, I don't remember what other city that was repeat offenders, but since they've been elected out, that's, or voted out, that's helpful. It's always
No, it was a smaller city. Than that one.
Um.
Okay, I thought you were gonna say it.
I was gonna say.
Go, say something.
So, of all the things this person was charged with, 41 fake complaints. I didn't see anything about falsifying government documents or something like that. Would that be, like, I'm creating this fake stuff and saying that these are complaints and they're not, and it is a document that the government is going to deal with? Do they not falsify?
Yeah, wouldn't that be criminal?
Yes, under the penal code. And it's-
Okay, because like I was reading what he was charged with and no one said anything about
Try to-
creating, like, yeah, he destroyed the stuff, tampered with the stuff, but he also created those 41 fake allegations. Shouldn't those carry
Yes,
some
absolutely.
charge?
That's the great part about the newspaper. They only pick up what they think you're most interested in, but I like that you find the details. Because as you mentioned before, that's what you will find during your investigation. These are the things you will uncover. And you may uncover additional violations as you do your investigation. At which you're obligated to act. You can't just ignore it.
I noticed that they formed a ethics commission as they were going along. Like, let
Of
me
city
run-
council members.
Right, 3 members, that's it. And I thought we're so proactive in having this set up for the last 4 years.
15. I think
2000.
It's been a long.
5,
This is
You
the
did the
task
10
force.
review.
Legally, how would you handle social media complaints received by the city? Is that how an official city document, or is that? How's social media handled when there's complaints come over to the city via social media?
Well, if it's a complaint, I wouldn't classify it as social media. I would classify it as a complaint, and if it can be verified, then we can.
Social media not.
If we can verify it, we would try to get the person to come in and sign and swear to
Yeah.
it, which is what the code requires.
You'd have to sign.
But I don't know. I don't know what we would do. I mean, if we were able to identify the person and they refuse to come in, then I suppose that we just have a private conversation with that elected or appointed official and say, this came in, just so you know, I don't know if it's a spell test issue or actual violation, but you have a problem. And I'm not above asking, if we can determine the facts are correct, to have somebody else sign and swear it, if they can attest to the facts that there, if a violation has occurred, it needs to be addressed. But if I can't get someone to sign and swear that piece of paper, I can't try. You guys can't try.
Therefore, it must be a person, not a pet parrot.
Yeah.
Yes.
There you go. Thank you.
Penelope, whatever.
Yes.
Because they have to sign it.
Yes.
There you go. That's so close.
So. When things come in though, when we're looking at the code of ethics, what would we think that this would be under?
Would this be a violation of public information?
That's not within our purview though, right?
It's not without.
No, that would be a criminal complaint against the district attorney.
Okay.
Because that was when I was reading through this, I was looking at it as to like whether or not this would be under our purview and our code. I pulled it up on my phone.
Okay.
But I didn't, thank you. I actually said, when I sat down, I didn't bring my printed code. I'm like you, Meredith, I like it all printed and tabbed and highlighted. But I didn't see where, I mean, we're not dealing with like conflicts of interest. We're not dealing with like bribes or anything of that nature. So I didn't know that this, in my opinion, would have fallen under our purview. It's certainly not okay. But I don't-
Maybe a misuse of power in office.
Stop dealing with gifts, benefits, personal interest.
Lying certainly is an issue of moral turpitude.
Or misuse of public trust. possibly.
That's where I like, when I went through this, I had difficulty. Misuse of city
Oh.
property, how about this? Misuse of city property perhaps, because the documents would be that if you're destroying city documents, that's
Yeah.
technically city property.
Okay.
I had borderline, 2-73, is that?
I scroll back in. Misuse and disclosure of official information, yeah. I mean. That makes sense to me. Reasonably conceivable a person to benefit from it. So we do think, whether it's that, whether it's property, it could rise to the board then.
But it's also an excellent example of a giving conversation. That look good, should have done it. All over. The, get raked over coals.
They got problems.
Yeah.
And I always am. I know this is just like a sample that Meredith pulled for us, but I'm always very, and impressed is not the word, concerned, probably better, but in awe of how rampant this is across, Texas and across other cities outside of Texas. It's always, I work within compliance and ethics, but I'm still always shocked at what individuals will do and what elected officials will do. And, it's always still unnerving when you see even this is sampling issues that are ongoing. And it happens, but it seems to consistently.
And I think it's because people who have power or who come to power feel that rules don't apply to them. And it could be financial power or authorities. Those rules are for other people.
I wonder if those, see, like chemos, if they had a document like we do, before you ran, before you accepted appointment, you were on notice. It's not like good old boy network, not under the table stuff. Does that keep some people away? You're being watched, you're less likely to do something. If there's no ethics commission or policy, get away with whatever you get away with, you're going to get caught.
Sometimes, if they're that way, it's not gonna bother them. It's just the way they are.
So I can give you follow-up information because I made the paper this morning on Granite Shoals.
Oh.
I couldn't print it off and hand it to you because it was after the posting date. But the counselor of Phil Fort was indicted on December 9th by a Burnett County grand jury related to vandalism at HEB. Which is why it's two-parted. So
Great guy.
as he is under review for all of his ethic violations, he started keying cars at HEB.
Oh,
Oh.
And that was significant enough, the grand jury indicted him.
wow.
So that must be some serious key carring.
Golly.
The estimates, the damages were greater than 2,500. And he has a state jail felony charge of $10,000 and 180 days in jail. And the ethics commission determined he did violate for destroying the 41 messages.
The board has problems.
And
So-
HEB rule.
And if he were to come here, hopefully he would not be elected or he would be reformed. So yes, I can give you a follow-up on that.
So it should be.
It depends on if it's finally convicted, he's appealing and. It's probably got everything.
Sounds like he has other
Hopefully
things on
not
his
sugar.
plate.
But if you don't
But
park
he
near,
thinks rules don't apply.
Right.
Because
One of those
everybody knows
people.
there are cameras.
Yeah.
Rules don't apply.
Mhm.
sounds like a gym to have at a party.
Don't park anywhere near.
Right.
Was the ballet.
So that up.
Mm.
Ooh, this is another one that I liked. It's always our friends who are to entertain me the most.
The Met Gala?
Oh, let's go way north. That's, I like that. Let's do
The
that.
Met Gala
We're
one.
gonna go ahead, we're gonna head all the way north.
So, you all always have the opportunity to send me articles. And this is the second one since being by Mr. Moore.
Oh,
Thank
okay.
you.
So you're always welcome to send me articles for me to add to your agenda.
We're heading federal now.
Yes, and just so one doesn't feel alone, AOC is now facing the
Under-
exact same.
Yes.
Was it because of the dress or just because of the tickets?
Yeah. So that's one of the things I want to talk about on this.
I did take the pictures out. Because I thought they were distracting.
Mhm.
So when I went and looked at what their ethics committee's policies were. And if either of them had asked a third party for the tickets is different than asking the event holder. Because they asked the event holder directly for the tickets is what they're getting in trouble for.
It's a solicitation of tickets, but yeah, if somebody comes and says, "Hey, take $36,000.
Right, or if I was a table sponsor, I had 10 tickets and they came to me and said, we know you have a table. Can she have a ticket? That's not. Apparently to them, it's different than if you go right to the Met and say, fork over these tickets. I don't think either way is right, but.
The $35,000 valuation in and of itself is interesting. Like those tickets are valued. I mean, the material swag that you take away from it is, sometimes trips and all like
Mhm.
$35,000 is.
And I didn't realize there were only 80 seats.
There are 500 invites.
Invites, but
But
there's something about 80
80
slots.
Baby
Yeah.
slots. Yeah.
Huh?
That's, I think that's a lot of spaces for that particular, for the magazine that they were talking about.
Okay.
They say, include his wife in your 80 allotted spaces.
For them,
for that.
okay. So, got it.
So, students should always be big enough to have $35,000.
Just at the school.
Yeah, and that'll be like a cheerleader event.
Hey, I'll run that.
One of our city council members gets tickets, they have to report it anyway.
Bye.
It's above.
Take a lot, and the photo ordinance is about $100. I would tell you, there'd be a very intense conversation regarding the smell test, as if that would actually be an appropriate thing to attend. And how the constituents would feel about it. It would be counseling because.
Accepting the tickets versus demanding them. Be more upset.
Mhm.
And we need to let them in. Versus. We're inviting all of city council.
That would be a difference if they were inviting a quorum,
Mm-hmm.
or at least the district council member as opposed to a different district. There would be quite a bit of conversation. Do you think this is an appropriate thing for you to attend? Can you articulate why your constituents would be okay with this? Because of the smell test. There's a lot of times where we talk to councilmen saying, it's really, does a benefit outweigh how this will?
One of the other articles talked about that they can influence social life. So if this person had purchased a ticket rather than asked for it, would that be considered part of social life?
Well, if there was a purchase, there wouldn't be an
Yeah.
ethical violation.
Right.
Right.
So, because when you were saying that, with the constituents think poorly if she attended. I don't think it's because you attended, it's because you didn't purchase it, you requested those tickets.
Yeah, and same in the article, with probably the private jet, the heading to Aspen on a private jet,
You can't intrude on social life.
because you didn't pay for it.
Bingo.
Well, if he takes his private jet to the Met Gala.
But do they buy the dress? Do they buy the dress? Everybody-
And that's a question that came up in the Super Bowl comes to town.
Yes.
You know, there's all these events and parties and we're like, well, you know, yes, you could probably get free tickets to this event, but do you really want to, you're like, yeah, I'm trying to think of the one that's not financial.
Maximum.
Do you really want your constituents to see you at the Madison party? I mean, things like that is. But now if it's like a Met Gala, perhaps it'd be okay if you bought your ticket. But there's definitely an expectation of them to reflect the morals of the citizens they represent.
Their brand tone.
And sometimes they're very excited to get to go hang out with fancy people.
Mhm.
And then you have to figure them out. But at the end of the day, if they buy the tickets, it's legal.
But Super Bowl, City of Houston, they don't have an ethics board, so it's fine.
Not my problem.
They were asking for free tickets and then selling.
So we'll see an article on that later. So the school district with the airplane,
Yeah.
Nice.
For Penn.
I know we have an airport. We should,
Yeah.
the ISD should have their own airplane, be one of two districts. This is where the school administrator, was personally flying the school district jet to visit family.
With his wife, who's also an administrator. Is
Is it a double violation of self and personal and family?
she probably shouldn't have gone.
That would make it better.
Well, I mean, they're both school district officials, regardless of the husband and wife, they should both be investigated.
He did make a $200 donation to run it out.
Yeah, $1,000 too.
What's funny is he thought he paid for gas or fuel, gas, word, but at one point. He said he paid for fuel and then realized he did not pay for fuel and then paid $200.
Yeah.
But the initial
Well, fair enough.
argument was that he was keeping up with being a pilot.
Right.
Right?
But being a pilot's not part of his duties with the
Right.
school.
Which is why he said, oh, we're doing an aviation program.
Yeah, no,
This is the excuse to buy.
What is that called? A BFQA?
Modified, job, qualification.
Job, yes. I don't think that's,
no,
on that.
complete misuse
That's
of
me.
Yeah, no,
property
it-
for sure.
yeah, if it's
The
under
school
improvement
board-
document,
Yeah.
The school board let them buy the plane.
Well, do we know that?
I mean,
It could have been
right.
donated. We don't, that might be a question that we would have to ask when we investigated.
And even the admonition that they stay current in their licensing and things like that. A trip to Aspen is not
Yeah.
justification.
Correct.
I mean, to stay current, you do 3 takeoffs and 3 landings every 90 days. I mean, it's very different requirement than what he was doing.
Yeah.
But wasn't it 50% of his
But it is, so it says
flying was
the
not related to any of that?
city is flying, the district's own plane, which it bought last year for its student aviation program. So, whole school board allows.
Because they held on to this idea, this story until after this school board.
Yeah, that was the other thing.
So that's community stations.
Well, and didn't it say that he's not even an instructor? So
Yes,
Mhm.
that's right.
he isn't even part of this program, really.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't, I mean, using it to fly your family to Aspen is not in any way
No,
using
hey, but he tried.
Even if it
city
isn't a
property and the way it was intended to be used.
So that would
Exactly,
be a use of office.
yes.
Yep.
Would you have any curiosity as to when the program was set up? Or when the plane was purchased, if it was purchased under his watch? And what the
Yeah.
enrollment might be,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Was it donated, was it purchased, was it purchased?
whether the current enrollment in the aviation program.
It's gradually.
Did his
Success
daughter
rate
graduate?
after post-graduate?
Did his daughter
Right.
graduate?
How recently did he get his pilot's license and
That's a good point as well.
Because to your point, he says that they say that only 3 of Dawson's 6 flights and plane were student demonstrations. So half of the flights he made were only
Hmm.
school. situations.
So how does he pay back the school district for this? The fuel, I mean, that adds up.
$200.
It's a lot more than
Right?
$200.
Yeah.
So,
I barely can fill my truck up for $200.
Yeah.
Well, that would be, I mean, if this was an applicable case to you all, when you are, if you determine it's a violation of use of office and you're determining sanctioned, you could set a dollar amount as the fine, as what you think the value of that trip was, was it the cost of the school district, is it just the cost of fuel, was it wear and tear? You would have the opportunity to use that as you're assessing the fine, the retribution. The restitution. I shouldn't use retribution.
so if one of our firefighters or police officers.
Yeah,
decided
I'm
to
sorry.
take a Fire truck or a police car to go take it on vacation with them, we'd say,
Mhm.
city property, it's government property, it's not yours to do what you want with.
Absolutely.
In my opinion, that's the same as when you use the company card for whatever you want, but that property still belongs to the company. It's not yours.
Well, that's the section in the code of ethics is the misuse of city property.
Yes. I'm not kidding, like,
You thought you were the only one then.
Two remaining articles.
Actually, very good on time.
Still fine on time. Let's go with our friends from DOJ. Bribery. So when you say the word bribery, that immediately feels like, okay, this is in our code. This is something that, that we govern. What were y'all's thoughts around this?
Maybe I don't know what this is. What is honest services fraud?
It's like kickback.
Okay, thank you.
so definitely violates the degree of civility
Mhm.
given to his cousins.
You just wanted to think
So I've been practicing
I know.
for 3 days.
that.
What is ours good? Second degree?
Say it louder. I don't know if everybody heard what you said.
So by taking back money to his cousins, it violates the section in our policy of degrees of civility. I think we do at least second, if not third. And in-laws as well.
I'm gonna call it, it's the nepotism chart. So how many Kevin Bagans away from you can you get until it's, okay versus not okay?
Mhm.
Related Kevin Bagans.
Yeah,
Okay, so we have. The code defines a relative as a spouse, domestic partner, child, stepchild, brother, sister, parent or step-parent, niece or nephew, aunt or uncle, grandparent or grandchild of the official.
Not cousin.
That is correct.
I mean, you can't bribe an individual, whether they're related to you or not, so that.
So aside from the criminal violations,
Mhm.
what other violations of our ordinance would you find?
So would that violates section 277, conflicts of interest, but also 2-94, participation in procurement? There had to be some sort of procurement process to avoid
Yeah.
these folks a contract.
I didn't catch that one, good job.
And if it was put out for a bid or whatever, he shouldn't have been in there with the vote to choose those companies. So it could have been done legally. Didn't follow the procedure.
Didn't have confidence in the competency to do it legally. I thought the procurement, that's not where my mind goes directly. It's a really good.
Yeah, I didn't think of that one. again.
the cousin should be.
Should be. The good news, after next week, on second, reading and approve the ordinance, we'll have a 5-year review that's up in the spring.
Okay. I mean, I think
For volunteers.
they fall somewhere on this chart, you just need to name them.
That's the state law chart, we'll have to amend our code and we can amend the chart. So that's my cheat sheet.
The official regulatory document here.
Yeah, I can't remember what the circles are. So if I get asked, I'll just pull that out.
So what else do we think they violate from the code itself?
Is there something for intermediate? Being an intermediate, it says Quintanilla facilitated the payment. So what does that entail? Facilitated.
If anyone else is interested in. I think they have to-
Well, like, we don't know what that entails.
Like being an intermediary? Would that be one of the questions we would have to ask to get more information? Like, what do you mean by that? What is the definition? What is the scope of what you're facilitating?
Because
So would you-
facilitating is a nice word. It could be, twisting somebody's arm and saying, you got it.
So is he bypassing someone else's job and facilitating it himself when that's not his job description?
Right.
Further to cover up what he was doing, what's been wrong.
It's actually a definition of a federal charge.
Okay.
So, like facilitate murder, facilitate. It's just part of the
Okay.
statutory definition of federal charge.
That's helpful. For most non-legally.
Mhm.
I don't criminal law, but also.
Any other sections that anyone's found? Violations?
Because they were doing business, if they were doing business with the city, they'd have to use these hours.
Mhm.
Almost everything I feel like goes back to conflict of interest. I mean, in some capacity.
Yeah.
That's really the catch all. Most
I mean,
most behaviors would fall under that. Either you filed the piece of paper and left the room, or you didn't and you're in trouble.
Right.
Um,
it's the easiest, what's funny to me though, it's the easiest one to like satisfy. If I just communicate and am transparent and declare and remove myself, then nothing's gonna come back from that, right? So like 5, 10 years or 2 years or whatever it is, somebody's not gonna be like, hey, that didn't feel right. I told you what I was doing. I left the room, left for the discussion. It's such an easy thing to satisfy, but it's also the thing that gets, the most of these articles and situations in trouble.
Well, we counsel the council members, because nobody else really has a conflict very often. That if it's a vendor, no matter what the dollar amount, fill the form out. And that way you don't have to worry when you hit the 100, we watch it for you. And so that way, and we have a tabulation. So when we put the agenda together, we go, oh, we write names down and, we know who has to step out of the room, what can be in consent, what can be on regular, because you'll notice that like any contract with TAP associates is always on regular, the mayor has to step out as his employer. So we have steps in place to try to assist them. But we tell them, you go out to dinner with the vendor, it's $25, just one. That way you don't have to keep track. We have a growing tally, but it's like the red light camera program. It's very easy to opt out. You stop at the red light and you don't have to worry about it. Fill out the form, you don't have to worry about it.
So from your office point of view, if a contract was awarded and possibly you found out that somebody had voted on it that should have recused themselves, would that void the contract? They shouldn't have been approved.
I'm gonna pull the state law on that.
A case like this.
Well, sorry, if it shouldn't have passed.
If it was the determining vote, yes.
Okay.
And then I'm pulling up chapter 171 to tell you based on the dollar amount, what the criminal charge would be. Okay, So under state law. Because he failed to file a conflict. Both he and the vendor. What was the dollar amount of the contract? If the contract amount is less than 1 million. It's a class C. If the contract is less than 5 million, it's class B. And if the class A, if it's at least 5 million.
We're 38.5.
Yeah, I was like, it's
Yeah,
38.5.
way over.
And so, any employees that were involved would have been terminated, and if he was the vote that made the determination to approve the contract, it would have been. But if it would have been approved without his vote, then the contract would still stand. But then you look at the vendor, does the vendor have a state law violation for their failure to disclose, and could you void it for that purpose? In our situation, I think we would probably look at what the contract is for, and what the other vendors are, and would it be doing a disservice to the residents by taking the second lowest bidder, are we spending more money than just having a criminal charge and saving your tax dollars?
Look at the span if this was from March 2008 to December 2015. So it's a lot of years to stuff.
So what you were saying about the vendor, so when a vendor wants to bid on a city contract, they have to disclose, is it part of theirs, they have to disclose that they have a connection?
Yes, sir.
People in the
So
city?
when you submit a bid to the city, one of the documents you have to fill out is called the 1295.
Mhm.
And so on the, you've seen this.
Many times, our companies always fill them out.
Yes, and so you have to say, and it's been for years, but you have to state whether or not you know somebody, if you're related to them, how you're related to them, and then you sign it and put your birth date on there.
Mhm.
Which I have no idea what we have to put your birth date, but we have to redact every single meeting because you can't put your birthday on there. But yes, you're required.
Okay.
So sometimes we disqualify them before they even get through the process because of that. Or that also helps us double check. I mean, call a council member and go, hey, I know such and such. You know, you might want to fill out a form. It's on the coming agenda. Because we do try to keep people out of trouble. We want to keep them out of the room if we possibly can, because we're not here to get them.
They don't want to be in trouble
So-
either. So I mean,
it's a recall, but yes, the vendors are required to fill the form out.
So then in that case, if they had not disclosed that, whether they won by majority or by one or not, that contract could be canceled. in that case.
Yes, and criminally, they are criminally responsible, but depending on the size of the contract, you know, there could be other partners involved that could still carry the contract forward.
Mhm.
And so in that circumstance, we would probably look at the value of the contract and what the services are and look at the next lowest bidder. So depending on that value, we would call up a bid bond
Mhm.
or performance payment bond and say, okay, if this is enough to cover the delta
Mhm.
and we could take the next vendor in line, we'll do it.
Mhm.
But if it's gonna cost your taxpayers an extra $2 million, we're probably gonna find a way to carve that person out, let them have the criminal penalties, but save the tax dollars, the $2 million, if they're still the competent. So we would still want them punished,
Yeah.
but we would not want to punish the rest of the citizens
Mhm.
for this vendor and this council member's bad actions. It's not your fault that these people
Mhm.
cheated the system and you shouldn't have to pay twice.
But there is protections on both ends.
Yes, sir.
But there could also be a situation where city's bidding on something. And a council member have a friend who's in that industry and say, hey, I want you to do this job. I know it's $1 million normally for other people, but as a friend of mine, we can do this for my city for 500,000.
And that's great, but we all also
You
look
still
at the
have to go
difference
through that.
between the bids and go, this is not a responsive bid, there's something fishy going on if you're happy. Because on a lot of things, we have engineer estimates and cost estimates. And so we're always very happy when the bids come in really close, because then you know you've got good bids. But you have one bid that's out here and you're going, this guy's just hungry. And you have another bid out here and you're going, okay, you're not following specs. You're using substandard equipment. And I can't say I want you to use ABC brand, this is, I can say, or it's equivalent, and if you can show me it's equivalent, I can't require you to use that specific brand unless it only functions with these two components of the same brand. So, I mean, there are a lot of checks and balances along the way, but we still have to be respectful of tax dollars. So we would probably let the criminal charge, we would insist the criminal charge goes forward, but we would try to carve it out so that the contract would still proceed without them getting the benefit. Just because we want, depending if it's a large enough delta, because we want to save the tax dollars. Fortunately, this has not been a problem for us. Fingers crossed it never is.
Well, in the interest of time, we're not gonna make it to this bill today. But any other final thoughts or comments regarding our discussion today? No? Do I have a motion to
I
adjourn?
think we're going to turn this one to meeting until next year.
All in favor? Aye.
I wish you all a happy holiday season.
Thank
you.
Hi, everyone.